Hello, my name is Watterson Young, and I'm going to be doing a presentation today on student athlete compensation. So, the reason this is very important today is because of the bill that was passed in California granting student athletes the access to make money off their name and likeness. This bill was presented to California and passed by the governor this past week. The name of the bill is State Bill 206. This will, like I said before, allow the student athletes to be compensated based off of their name and image and likeness, and allow them to make money without any repercussions from making their own money. What's the history kind of behind athletes being paid and compensated? The NCAA is said to be a place for amateur athletes to be able to get an education as well as play college athletics and sports at a very high level. Through the years, NCAA has grown to heights that I don't think anyone would have ever imagined with the growth of football and basketball throughout the last 50 to 60 years. The amount of money that is being made has really multiplied by tens and hundreds over the last 70, 80 years. A couple of the rules that and examples that really come into play when you talk about student athlete compensation is the one and done rule. So for many years, high school basketball players were allowed to go straight to the NBA right out of high school. That was changed in the last 20 years to force high school athletes or athletes in general to be at the age of 19 or 1 year removed from finishing high school before they could enter into the NBA. And this is an example of how the NCAA has kind of forced kids to come into colleges and universities, um, play a sport, and not get compensated, whereas in the past they could go straight to the NBA and be compensated for their play and their name and likeness and everything of the sort. Another example of this, maybe not quite as well known as the one and done rule, is Maurice Claret. He actually played football at Ohio State and decided after his freshman year and a little bit into his sophomore year that he wanted to declare for the NFL draft. And at that time, and still today, you're not allowed to enter the NFL until you're 3 years removed from high school. Um, so he actually went to court and took the NFL to court to um, make a ruling over whether he should be allowed to enter into the NFL draft or not and be drafted and eligible to play in the league. And in the end, he was actually granted access by a federal judge to be allowed to go into the NFL after his sophomore, halfway through his sophomore year, and play professional football. In the end, this didn't end up working for Maurice Claret, and also the rule still stands that you have to be in college for 3 years and 3 years removed from high school before you can enter the NFL. So those are just a couple of examples of the rules and the history behind the NCAA and their amateurism rules. So moving on, some previous NCAA compensation issues, kind of similar to the things we were just talking about before, but these are more times when schools and individuals were compensated for their play or not fairly compensated also for the use of their image and likeness. So one of the biggest examples um, of an issue that came to the NCAA was the NCAA football and NCAA basketball games that were using the players' names and images in these games. They were not giving the players any money for using their names and likeness, and so there was a, um, a lawsuit brought against the NCAA because of this. And in 2014, the NCAA actually settled for a large amount of money, about $20 million, I believe, to go back and pay back some of the money that um, these athletes, that's names and likenesses, were being used in these games over the last 20 years. So that is one of the biggest examples of when the athletes actually fought back against the NCAA to make money for the use of their names and images. Another example of compensation in the NCAA was SMU football team. Um, Back in the 1980s, the SMU Mustangs were actually one of the top football programs in the country. Um, they had many good players, many players that today we would see at the likes of Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State and these schools that are top five programs in the country. And then some of those players that we would see at those schools were actually attending SMU in Texas. And it came to find out that some of these athletes were actually being paid by the university, which is strictly against the NCAA's policy of amateurism and not being able to compensate players. So after a lengthy investigation, NCAA found SMU was violating the rules and actually gave them the death penalty, which was consist of loss of scholarship for many years and complete deletion of the program for a couple of years. And SMU still hasn't fully recovered from that. So those are just two examples of times when one time when players fought back against the NCAA, and another time when the NCAA punished players in a university for receiving money for their play. So next, we're going to talk about um, the State Bill 206 a little bit more. It was recently passed, as I said before, in California and signed into legislation by the governor. Um, this bill will not go into effect until 2023, um, but it is very groundbreaking for collegiate athletics and NCAA because the universities will not be able to punish players for making money off their image and likeness, but that is strictly against the NCAA rules. So that will come to a head soon once this law goes into action. A couple of things that were said in the law: it is going to prevent post-secondary educational institutions um, from community colleges and every athletic association, conference, or other group organization with authority over intercollegiate athletics from providing a prospective intercollegiate athlete with compensation um, for use of the athlete's name, image, or likeness. It's going to require professional representation to be obtained by the student athletes, and it's going to prohibit the revocation of a student athlete's scholarship. So basically, it's going to not allow the athletes to be punished if they do receive money for um, their name or likeness. A couple of reasons that paying student athletes might be necessary um, is that because a lot of the rules the NCAA does have now are unfair and can be considered not logical. So a couple of the rules like that are the fact that if a student athlete wants to go out and say that they're maybe the best swimmer in the city and they want to say, hey, I'm a swimmer at the University of Miami, come learn from a collegiate swimmer, they can't do that right now. And that's just doesn't really make sense to me. And I feel like that is definitely one of the ways that this legislation will really help student athletes be able to make a little bit of money for their name and what they can provide to someone. So a couple of reasons why college athletes being paid won't work is the issue that all of the top teams will get all the talented players because they'll be able to provide them with endorsement deals that other schools can't, and so that's one of the reasons that people might be against athletes getting paid. Another issue is the fact that where will amateur athletics still exist? So if colleges are no longer being um, if college athletes are no longer not getting paid, then where is the line set to um, allow athletes to not get paid and just play for at an amateur level? So that line kind of gets blurred with this legislation being passed. So what are the ways that you can make this work? So I think compensating the athletes for their image and likeness is an easy way, but I think that you could put a cap on the amount that they could get from an endorsement deal per month. So usually, if they're already getting room and board and those things still paid for through the college, I think about 500 to maybe max of $1,000 per month would be plenty for these athletes to live off of. They're still getting everything that they currently get through scholarships and things like that. But then anything that they might get paid over that, you can put into they could be forced to put into a fund for later on. So they're still making that money over that um, cap per month, but they can't use it immediately. So it's not like they're getting paid millions of dollars up front. It'll be deferred, and they'll get it once they, are out of school, or in 10 years when they're 30 years old and are able to make wiser decisions with that money. So in conclusion, really this is a make or break time for the NCAA. A lot is going to be changing over the next really 2 to maybe 5 years as far as NCAA, and some of the big names like LeBron James and Draymond Green that are speaking out against the NCAA and what they're doing is really going to force the NCAA's hands. They're either going to have to make big changes and continue on in a different direction, but with the same organization, or that might completely fall apart. We just don't know right now, but it'll be interesting to see for sure. So thanks for listening, and bye bye.